Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about property controls, what they are, and how to add them to your code components. So property controls are controls written in code that allow you to make changes and edit code components in the Framer UI. So if we take a look at a code component, and I now try to drag it out in the UI, it works, but you can see on the side there's actually no property controls on the properties panel that will allow you to change the visual elements of this code component. So we want to be able to add controls to change things such as the color, the text, and other properties like that. So the first thing I actually want to show you is this component from the store. This component from Ben actually just includes all of the available property controls in Framer, displays their values on the canvas, and it can act as a nice starting point when you're wanting to put in your own property controls. So I can just install it. And when I drag it out, you can see all the property controls and all the properties in the properties panel. But what I can also do is copy the code from this and now I can actually see how all these property controls look in code. And then this just gives you a nice starting point for when you actually try to do this yourself. It's really helpful for knowing where to start. Another place we can look for help with property controls is actually in the API documentation. So if I go ahead and open this up, you can see at the bottom here, I have a property controls section. So this also gives you a more detailed overview of what all the property controls are and how to include them in your code. So now let's actually take a look at a code component and try to add them ourselves. So the first thing we actually need to do is to import add property controls, and it'll give you that helper right there. So now they're accessible from the Framer API. And the second thing is control type. So we just need to import those two things, and then we can get started with adding our property controls. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and delete all of this so we can just get a clean template. And the first thing I'm going to do is just pass along the name of my component. So I'm just going to say export function my component, pass in the props, then I'm going to return a frame with the props inside. So that's just going to look like this with props.text, because I'm just going to have a text property. Alright, this is the first step. Then I'm going to create an object with all of the control definitions. So first I'm just going to say the name of my function, so that's my component. And here I'm just going to set the default props first, so default props. Then let's finish this by adding one default prop. So my property control, I want to have a text box. So by default, I want that text to say, just do hello world, and then we have our default prop set. And then the last thing I'm going to do is actually add the property controls and set the control type and set the title of the property control. So to do that, I'm just going to say add property controls like we've imported from Framer. We'll say my component here. And then next we're just going to say text, because that's the property control that I'm going to set. And then we're going to list the type of property control that it is. So I'm just going to say type, and then this is where we're going to use the control type that we imported from Framer. And in this case, text is a string, so I'm going to set the control type to string. And then the last thing is I'm going to set a title. So this is actually the title that's going to appear in the UI of Framer. So for this title, I just want it to say text. Alright, so once we have all that set up, once we go to our components over here, drag out my component, you can see I have that default props, that text where I said hello world, and I now have a text box exposed in the properties panel where I can make changes straight from the UI of Framer. There we go. So this is just a basic overview of adding property controls. Of course, you can always check the API documentation to add more and discover all the different types of properties that you can add. Thanks for watching.